like
Stop the
regular
game.
food.
Stop the game.
I was like, stop making my food, man. I looked down, I'm like, what? Minus 120.
Mercedes finished third last year with a car that Toto Wolff called a shitbox.
He's never been on a podium. He's had like 180 career starts. You don't tell a guy to suck my balls and think you're going to be friends the next day. So those two dudes, they got some issues. So we'll see how that sorts itself out. My man, Joe Fortenbaugh. We've made it. We're talking F1 betting content. I'm Dalen. This is our first of many to come this season as ESPN and F1 season starts this week. Bahrain Grand Prix. We're going to have some each race week we'll be doing this. We'll giving you the picks for the week, but also obviously with this being the futures before the season starts, a little bit of a larger episode. My friend, I know you've been a fan for a long time. How's this feel?
I have. I'm excited to do this with you. This last week has been very conflicting because on one hand, you're following everything that's going on in testing. You're getting ready for Bahrain. But on the other hand, Netflix drops Drive to Survive. So you're kind of following and recapping everything from the year before. And then you're moving into the next season. Like, I almost forgot how strong Ferrari started before completely falling apart. Like, it was a tale of two seasons early on there. So reliving some of that's been a lot of fun. Obviously, seeing Gunther Steiner up in the mountains in the Dolomites always makes me yearn to make more money and retire. But I'm stoked, man. I'm excited for the season.
Yeah, and Steiner's use of the F-bomb is fantastic. Like, just his use of that word is just on a whole different level. It takes up like 20% of the words he actually says on the show. That gets you primed to get you ready. But there's obviously a lot going on here, and let's kind of just in terms of diving into the conversation. When you look big picture, you mentioned Ferrari there. I mean, if their reliability issues and the strategy issues torpedoed them, but they started so strong. When you look at the numbers, big picture, Verstappen is still the favorite to win it all. But let's start here because you texted me last week. I thought this was interesting. You said, am I crazy? Or you're like, what's wrong? What am I missing here? Because Verstappen was still minus 120. This was on Wednesday, sorry, but the day before testing started. So why is he minus 120 to win the championship, his third straight? Does that number seem low? Should we just be a huge bet on that? Yeah, that seemed like the move. Did you make that move?
Yeah, I think we both made that move.
Yeah,
we had a nice little conversation about that. You're sitting there looking at minus 120, which, that for those who are new to this, that's a very small favorite. It's basically implying what? That Max has maybe a 55% chance to win the title. Well, how many people are really in the race? This isn't the NFL where maybe 20 teams, 16 teams are competing each year. You maybe have 3 teams, maybe, but you don't have 6 drivers because Checo is not going to vault above. Like with the strategy, it's always going to be about Max. So you and I are going back and forth, and I'm thinking for one race, like in Bahrain, he's minus 120. A lot could go wrong there. You go into turn 1, you lock up, you touch wheels, you could be out. We saw some of that last year, but the cream's going to rise to the top over the larger sample. And you got to figure with Red Bull presumably being so far ahead of everybody else right now, you get off to a hot start like last year, and then you're able to coast late in the season if Mercedes isn't able to make up the update. So we're talking about it. It's a great bet. I make the bet. And then after testing, and all the word coming out of testing was Red Bull looks ominous, right? Yeah. Like ominous was the word everybody used. Ferrari looking good, Mercedes looking good, but not great enough. Then it jumps to minus 165. So clearly the odds makers are following what happened in testing. And for us to lock in that 120, we're in a nice spot right now heading into the first race of the season.
You said that to me, and I was about to call a game somewhere. I don't know where the hell I was, but my point was, I was in some place that was like a Chipotle type joint for like
stop the game.
Food.
Stop the game.
I was like, stop making my food, man. I looked down. I'm like, what? Minus 120. I'm like, how did I not look at that yet? And B, that was just shocking to me that was the number. And now this minus 165 seems more apt to where it should be because it's not just his excellence. I mean, he's cold-blooded, not just in terms of getting his elbows out. Dude just doesn't make many mistakes, if any. And we saw that late last year, coupled with a team that doesn't make many mistakes and probably the best car. It just seems right. So minus 120 was the play. Minus 165, that's a lot of juice. I'm not laying it there. Now, let's look at the other numbers, though. We're going individual. We'll get to the constructors in a second. Lewis Hamilton plus 500, third favorite. Charles Leclerc plus 450, second favorite. Do you make any plays there? Do you think that Max could have a collapse? Is it worth betting on another driver at this point from a future standpoint?
How do you feel about Mercedes' ability to make updates and adjustments quickly this season. Handicapping last season, preseason versus this year, two very different things. You had all the new rules and regulations, so we had brand new cars last year. Mm-hmm. This year, we don't really have those changes. So Red Bull's making modifications, sure, but they had a great car, and they're moving into the season with a great car. Mercedes had that porpoising issue.
Yeah.
Red Bull had the power unit issue. So they've had to undergo some changes, and you've got a new leader at Ferrari as well. So there's some stuff you're undergoing. You come into this season, Mercedes obviously downplaying themselves coming off testing. I think they're going to start slower, but they're going to be able to catch up quicker. So when you're looking at Lewis right now, at what is it? I'm seeing 5-1.
Yep,
Charles Leclerc plus 450. I'd be more inclined to take a shot on Leclerc because I think Ferrari's going to be ahead of the game earlier in the season. But if you think Mercedes is going to be able to catch up quick, and that's got to be the handicap here, catching up quick, you can't get into a huge hole, then Lewis obviously is going to be worth a shot at 5-1 because it's Lewis Hamilton.
What concerned me a little bit, and I don't know if it was... let's say I'm a relatively novice fan. I've been a fan for basically a year. I'm getting involved. I'm understanding. I'm watching, as many Americans are. But when you listen to what people say, and not just what they've written, but Lewis did say, we have a mountain decline after testing. That concerned me a little bit because you'd want to hear more positivity given they did make great strides for the course of last year. They've already announced they're going to have an upgrade package in the, I think, the third race, I think in Australia maybe. So they're already thinking about what needs to change, which is good. But where are you going to start? To your point, you can't fall too far behind. So I'm leaning more towards, I'm not going to play Leclerc. We'll come back to the constructors in just a second here. But I think Ferrari with Frederick Vasseur, I think I'm just buying into new leadership and new management and saying that, hey, I'm going to fix our strategy issues. I'm going to have accountability. I'm going to change the tenor of the organization because I think that car is still good. The car did show it was good. We just had some driver error, but more often than not, team error and strategy error within it. With that said, let's go to the constructors. Red Bull's minus 150, Mercedes plus 250, 2.5 times your money, Ferrari plus 330. The inverse of what we were just talking about. Let's just ask that question. When you look at Mercedes, Ferrari, and I'll throw Aston Martin in there because they're getting a lot of love and they spent a lot of money. They're much longer odds to win this thing. They're constructors plus 6,500, so that's a big difference. Do you think that the market is paying basically for the Mercedes name and Lewis Hamilton? Are they giving you that price based on that, or what do you make of that?
That's an excellent question. Because the way I would handicap it would be Red Bull's obviously one. I think you put Ferrari second. Then you put Mercedes third. Then there's this conversation about whether or not Aston Martin's going to challenge Mercedes. I think we're overvaluing that a bit. Aston Martin, probably the fourth best team this season. And I know we're talking about threatening the Silver Arrows, but at the same time, Mercedes finished third last year with a car that Toto Wolff called a shitbox.
Yeah, exactly.
They finished third with a shitbox. If that car gets better, right, Aston Martin needs to make a huge jump to get him. And then there's also the drivers. You've got Lewis and George Russell, and Russell performed very well last year. Fernando Alonso is going to get the most out of the Aston Martin, but Lance Stroll, we don't even know if we're going to see him in Bahrain, right? Like we could have Felipe Drugovich. There was the talk about bringing Vettel back because of the injury in the bicycle accident for Lance Stroll. So I think the second driver hurts Aston Martin because I don't think it's going to be better than George Russell. I would play Ferrari if you're looking at the constructors. And I talked to Johnny Avello from DraftKings the other day. And I wanted to know, what's the money you guys are seeing so far in terms of individuals and in terms of constructors? They're taking more money on Ferrari than just about anything. People are going to play Red Bull. This doesn't mean they have inside information on Ferrari. They just think they're mispriced because Carlos Sainz hasn't been talking a lot. If you've noticed, he's usually pretty forthcoming with information. He's pretty affable. He has been very quiet. And he had talked about how he went through a big reflection period. He's trying to zone in and take his game to the next level this season. And I think that 1-2 punch with those two at Ferrari, it's not better than Verstappen, but do you see Sainz being better than Checo? And when you're talking about the way that works, I'd make a play on Ferrari for the constructors. Not saying they should be the favorite, but I don't think they should be behind Mercedes.
Exactly. I totally agree with that. You can do different things, folks, and we're not going to dive into all the bets because there's all types of different parlays and prop bets, and we'll get to them in future shows where we're diving into more of a single race and head-to-heads, and we'll get to some of that here. But you can parlay Max on the season to win with Ferrari and get yourself a good price there too if you think the Max is going to carry the day. And you want to bet Ferrari in terms of that, in that regard, in terms of winning.
Imagine the mental gymnastics you're going to go through with each race if you make that bet. You're going to need Max to do really well, but then you're also going to need Ferrari to slide like right in there. It's like betting on a team and then betting the over/under. Like emotionally, you have to be very strong to handle something like that.
Trying to thread a pretty small needle right there. And I think you're also betting a little bit that Perez may struggle with some of the pressure, which he was vocal about in Drive to Survive, that he had his ups and downs through last season. But if he struggles, then maybe that can actually result in having a more competitive, at least one of the two championships be competitive, because last year it was a runaway for both. Let me ask you about Fernando Alonso, though, too. You told us off air that in your conversations with different folks and taking money, you already mentioned what Ferrari's taken. Fernando Alonso at plus 2,800, he's taken a lot of money to win the Drivers' Championship. Two-time world champ in the past. Is this just hype? Do you buy into this at all? That's a solid long shot right there. And there's a lot of things they have to overcome.
So like what we talked about earlier, I don't think you're playing Aston Martin in the constructors because of the second driver. That's where you're going to have an issue. Like you're going to have an issue there. But when you're looking at Alonso, he's always going to get the most out of his car. And this year, he's supposed to have a hell of a car. Now, part of that is probably the hype coming out of testing, which they always preface it. Everyone who covers testing says, we can't take this too seriously, but it's the only thing we have to cover. So we end up taking it very seriously and we get really excited. He's looking, the move over to Aston Martin's coming at the perfect time for him. He's going to be the lead driver. He's going to be the focal point. Like I said, he's going to get the most out of the car. And this is supposed to be a great car this season. Every indication of what was coming out of the paddock from everyone that people were talking to regarding how teams were looking, Aston Martin. Like on the opposite end, you have McLaren. McLaren looks like they're taking a huge step back. We'll get to that. But Aston Martin looks to be the team that not only is supposed to challenge Alpine for the 4th spot, challenge Mercedes. So I think at 28-1, if you want to make a play on Alonso, I mean, we saw this with this team just a few years ago when they copied the Mercedes car, and they had one of the fastest cars in the grid. Now they're trying to copy the Red Bull car. 28-1 is probably worth a couple bucks in the event that they struck gold here, because the money and the resources they put behind this car and this team and what they'll continue to do over the course of the season, they're going to try to be right there, don't you think?
100%. New HQ, wind tunnel. Lawrence Stroll's invested a ton of money. They've stolen. They've acquired a lot of talent from Mercedes. I would say that in terms of the people. So they're staffing it with arguably the best organization. They're trying to design it against the best car. They're putting resources behind it. They have a former world champ who's, acquitted himself quite well last year and still seems very capable. What I believe encroaching on 41 years old. So I don't think that's a crazy play at all. Real quick, back to the parlay thing. What you can do is you can parlay Red Bull and Max together and get to plus money and get yourself plus 100, plus 105. So you're getting the even money to bet the two favorites, which ironically, if you're betting for another dominating year, you're in a pretty good spot.
I mean, if it's another runaway, you're going to be in great shape. They by all indications, they should come out firing. And they had that issue with the fuel and everything in race 1 last year in Bahrain. They're not going to have that issue. If they get wiped out, it's going to be because of some accident, some freak thing that we always have to account for. But they are going to hit the ground running. And it's just a matter of what kind of lead they want to build on everyone this fast in the season, because they appear to be razor sharp on all cylinders right now. The programs they were running and testing, have you heard a single glimpse of negativity? Have you heard anything about a potential issue for this team? They seem to be just firing on all cylinders.
Whether it's the folks I've talked to that were there or when you're reading other coverage, it just seems like they're in the zone. They seem very comfortable with the car. The racers seem very comfortable with. Obviously, you've got good leadership with Horner's been there forever now, and they've got a great team. It just seems like they're picking up right where they left off. Yeah. Where everybody else is trying to make adjustments to chase them, while they're just kind of just coasting along. We'll see if that's the case.
And it's a huge advantage. One more note on that. It's a huge advantage when you're blowing out the field in 2022. You can turn your attention to 2023 with months to go. The development of the car, you have this uncanny ability to get ahead of everybody else, and everyone's just caught playing catch up. This is what Mercedes was doing to Red Bull for years, and now the tide has turned.
Yeah, the tide has definitely turned. And when it turned last year, you saw it in Drive to Survive. Toto did not handle that well when that tide turning. Let's talk McLaren, because they got Piastri in the offseason. Or last year. That's a huge story. He's coming with big hype. Lando Norris this is how big he's got in America. You walk through the Terminal C in Atlanta. I'm seeing him doing Toomey ads. Just a lot of Lando. Where a year ago, and a half ago, I'm like, who the hell is this young, good-looking guy? But their car did not look good. Is this an auto fade situation? Like, where are you at with McLaren?
So I'm going to be looking for the matchups. And I know as we try to educate people on what you can bet in this sort of thing, when you get to race day, you can bet drivers heads up. They might say Lando Norris versus Pierre Gasly, and they'll put a price on it. Whichever driver finishes best, that's the win. Those are some of my favorite bets because they're an absolute rush. You're just locking in on two guys. You're following those pit stops and those pit strategies like you wouldn't believe. So Lando, an exceptional driver. He got everything he possibly could out of McLaren last year, but every indication is that there are one or two teams that are in really bad shape coming out of testing. They're one. AlphaTauri is getting no love whatsoever. No one was impressed by anything they saw there. They've got a lot to figure out. Auto fade, yeah, for the most part. I can't wait to see these matchups because with Piastri, you've got a rookie. And I mean, I know he had a lot of success at the lower levels, but some of these guys early on, they got to learn the game. That's going to be an auto fade depending on the matchups. And then Lando, while he's going to get the most out of that car, they look and sound like a team so dejected that they did not hit their thresholds, their expectations, that they're coming into this season. I've seen people slotting them 7th in the constructors. Like above Williams and above AlphaTauri, which is just a huge step back for that crowd. So yeah, depending on the matchups we see, I'm kind of hoping they overperform in qualifying so that we get a better price to go against them on race day.
That's exactly. I was like, I hope they have a good Saturday that can change the whole discussion. Now, granted, it's the first race in. We may miss fire, but I think you're going by what the mood of that team. It wasn't just what you saw on the track. It was the mood. It was the commentary. It just doesn't seem like they were going in very confident. And with a rookie, he's got a lot of pressure, man. That's a ton of hype. And you can do things like bet outside the top 10. Like we'll get into again how you can pick teams and fade teams essentially as we go through the year here. Alpine, pretty quiet. There's gonna be what do you make of Alpine, and how would you think about playing them as you come into this weekend?
So it feels like everybody was pretty forthcoming about what they thought of their testing, except for them. They were the ones playing their cards the closest to the vest. So that could be one of two things. They're in some trouble and they don't want to let people know. But it seems like in F1, it's the opposite of how we do things here with like pro football. Like you're going to get a lot of BS from teams when it comes to injuries. Mahomes, his ankle's fine. Don't worry about it. He's 100%. Whereas here, it's like the drivers want to get ahead of it. It's almost like they want to put it on the engineers. Let you know in advance, we're not where we want to be. So when you see the performance, you don't blame the driver, you blame the car and the engineers. That's what it feels like Mercedes is doing. So I think they're keeping the cards close to the vest. I think they're ready to perform. The big storyline with them, the two French drivers, Ocon and Gasly, are these two going to get along? Because you generally have your number one driver and your number two, and the number two knows his place in the hierarchy. But with Magnussen and Hülkenberg at Haas, that's a fascinating scenario. With De Vries and Tsunoda at AlphaTauri, that's a fascinating scenario. And this is one as well. So I think they're being underpriced. If you feel, and they're talking about an upgrade package for the first race, which is another thing, like how do we handicap that? So I'm bullish on them. I think you're going to get some good matchups with them. Maybe Gasly, who's in a new car, against someone like, whether it's Drugovich or Stroll. I think that might be a play if they match those two up in the opening round. That's something I'm going to be looking for. I'm more bullish on Alpine than bearish. I think they're playing the cards close to the vest. I think they have a good car here.
I think that their coverage of how that team developed and this relationship with the drivers, I think is interesting when you put that in perspective. And I do think, to go back to Ferrari for a minute, it doesn't concern me, but I don't think Carlos Sainz thinks he's the number two. I think he still thinks team orders don't exist within that group. And when you saw that play out last year in a race, so that's when you don't know where the pecking order fits, and the team thinks one thing, the drivers may think another. That could rear its head. So I do wonder, again, leadership wise, how that is handled, because last year it seemed like Leclerc was their guy, but then kind of, and the Sainz didn't feel that way either. So those dynamics matter. And you mentioned Yuki and De Vries. De Vries is fascinating because I think you get to see, because he had one great race in a Williams, and that was a great race. I mean, he got top 10 in a Williams. That was impressive. But this number, folks, head to head with his partner, his teammate, makes no sense. This is a season-long bet. He's minus 165. Yuki Tsunoda's plus 120. This is just to score more points over the course of the season. I can't believe that. Like, Yuki's not bad in this, and he had one good run, which is great, but that price discrepancy seems wild to me.
Yeah, so for example, for anyone who's listening to this and is unfamiliar, it's just a matchup. Which racer finishes the season with more points? And they put the guys from the same team together for a lot of these. So Verstappen is like a huge favorite over Sergio Perez, right? Like, because we know in any situation, Red Bull's deferring to Verstappen, Perez is going to have to fall in line. But you have some of these teams that have much closer battles. You might not have the true number one. I thought Tsunoda would be priced as the favorite. I know people are hot on De Vries because he's a rookie, but remember, what is he, like 27, 28? He's an old rookie. It's taken a while to get here. And Yuki's driving for next year. I mean, he's on the hot seat this season. So I think given his experience with that team, and his situation versus a perhaps slightly overrated rookie, I think the price is wrong. I think at least This should be closer to like -110 both ways. So I take a shot on Tsunoda. I want to throw one at you. Ocon's -125 over Pierre Gasly. Now, Ocon's got the experience in the car. He's the favorite, but Gasly, from what we understand, you give him a good car, he's going to get a lot out of it. Would you play the favorite there?
I like Gasly, but when he ran with Red Bull, he did struggle. Like when he's had the best breast, he's been up and down. So I do think the experience with the car matters. I'm not going to play that. I would probably lean toward Ocon. I don't think he's a bad driver. I mean, he's had some good performances, whether it was back when they were in the Renault or now with Alpine in the same situation. It's a different team, I guess, but branding, I guess. But I would probably lean toward Ocon there. But I think that's an interesting point.
Here's another one. Haas. Hülkenberg and Magnussen are both -110. It's the only one that's evenly priced. Now, Hulk's been away for a few years. I mean, we've seen him in reserve roles, but we haven't seen him regularly driving. Magnussen comes back last year. He has that amazing fifth to start the season in Bahrain, but -110 both ways. What would you do there?
I'm going Hülkenberg. True coin flip, but I would go Hülkenberg there. I mean, I'm going to go Magnussen there. Part of the problem with Hülkenberg is he's never been on a podium. He's had like 180 career starts. Like, he's been, not that that's easy to accomplish, and not when we're talking about a Haas. If somebody got on a podium, they would lose their freaking mind. They'd be pumped. I just think the experience with Magnussen, I loved his mindset. That's what I thought we took away from Drive to Survive too, just kind of seeing how he had his whole perspective on racing and life is different with that time away. I wonder how Hülkenberg reacts. I wonder, to your point, those guys, you don't tell a guy to suck my balls and think you're going to be friends the next day. So those two dudes, they got some issues. So we'll see how that sorts itself out. And with Gunther in the mix, he plays a lot in the media. So if things aren't going well, he's saying stuff. So the dynamics there are heavy. I would lean toward Magnussen, the relationship, experience with the car, and I think just where he was at, that's where I would go. How about you?
I'm going the same way. I think just the experience of the car is what's going to mean everything to me in a lot of these matches. When you take an experienced driver who's been with the team, I mean, Ocon's been with Alpine forever, right? So he knows that thing inside and out. And Gasly's coming into a new dynamic, new team. There's going to be a learning curve there. And when you're talking about earning a finite amount of points, it's not like Red Bull where you're going to be stacking points every week. Some of these teams, especially the AlphaTauri and Haas, you might only rack up a few points this year. So who's going to get it? Hülkenberg never seems to go for it, but he's very consistent and steady. Magnussen's the risk taker of the group. And given his knowledge of the car, I would lean to him. But I think that's a fascinating bet. I think either way, you put yourself in a fun situation for the wager.
Anything else from a season-wide futures perspective you want to hit on before we get to Bahrain?
No, that was pretty much it. The Tsunoda matchup, I think, was the one that was glaring and jumped off the page. Yeah. I think if you're getting involved in Max to win the whole thing, if you want to take a shot on Alonso, a lot of people who are new to this might look down the board and they might find a guy they really like. Oh, Valtteri Bottas used to be at Mercedes, maybe he rekindles it. It's not about the greatness of the driver. That's part of it. It's the car. So many of these cars are just not going to compete. A lot of people love Lando Norris. That car is not going to compete for a championship this year. You're just throwing away your money. So it's really only a handful of things you can play. Ferrari for the constructors, I think, is worth it. If you really want to spin the wheel, it's Alonso for the title at like 28-1. That's where you can get a little risky.
Yeah, I hear you. I agree. Let's go to Bahrain here quickly. We've gone a little bit longer than we wanted to. Just in terms of just big picture, do you ever bet, like right now you can bet matchups in free practice, you can bet the team winning for free practice. Like, do you ever mess with practices, especially this early in the season where I'm not sure really what the goal is for them in practice? Is it put up times? Is it just to work on things? I don't know what the goal is.
See, that and that's exactly right. I've never done it. I'm going to maybe mess with it a little bit this year to see if there's an edge, because there's always an edge to be found. Yeah. You've just got to figure out what it is and where the information is. And for this, when every team has a different mindset going into practice, if you know that mindset and you can handicap that, you're going to find the edge. But I don't have that right now. It's race number one. Some teams are going to want to just be working on things. They're probably not going to care too much about the time. It's about getting the car right. Other teams want to go out and push. Certain drivers want to push. Certain drivers are going to work on other things. So I think it's a very specific case-by-case basis. I've got nothing for the practice sessions. I think you're taking too much of a risk in the first race of the year getting involved with that. If you want to do it for fun for a small amount of money, nothing wrong with that. So maybe you can find yourself a matchup there. A guy like Alonso is probably going to push a little bit, so I might look for something like that.
It was interesting too with DraftKings. Their team prices right now, Ferrari's plus 100, even money, as the favorite to win free practice as a team, whereas Red Bull's plus 135. So as we're saying, motivation, what are we looking at? What do teams want to accomplish? I don't know. And yesterday, you're right. Find the angle. If you can start to understand how teams want to approach things through the course of the year, it may really help you.
How about like track it? If you're going to do this, track the practice sessions. Certain teams and cars perform on different tracks. It's just like golf. It's a horse for the course sort of thing. Like we see certain guys, like there's a reason why Bubba Watson plays really well at Augusta National. He's a lefty. The course sets up well for some lefties. Mickelson's won there too. It's the same thing here. Certain cars perform better on certain tracks. As a result, you need to know those handicaps, but follow the practice sessions throughout the year. Trends and patterns may emerge, and that's going to put you in a position to cash.
Well said. Qualifying with this race, similarly, do you want to make it? Would you make a play here? The numbers, you can do some things, at least from DraftKings yet. We don't have pure like winning the qualifying. We got fastest lap and different stuff like that. So we don't have numbers yet, but how do you approach that?
Qualifying, now we know what they're all going for. They're going for speed. We know that. And what we know coming out of testing, or at least what we think we know, is that Red Bull is every bit as good as they were last year, if not better. Team looks in good shape. Drivers look in good shape. Car looks in great shape. Mercedes appears to be better. But like you said, the George Russell's talking like, let's be cautious. It's going to take some time. Ferrari looks to be good as well. I would be looking to play Max or even Checo, because in qualifying, it's not going to be about him deferring to his teammate. So I would look at Red Bull. I don't think you need to overthink this one. If Aston Martin's as good as they say, maybe Alonso puts a great run out there. I mean, he did have one of the fastest times over testing, but we don't know the specifics, fuel load, everything to that nature, what programs they're running. So I would be looking to Red Bull, maybe again Alonso, if he really does have that good of a car.
I mean, they do have things like you can do the fastest qualifier parlayed with the race winner to get yourself at like plus 200, plus 175 for Max. That's a lot of ifs. I don't know if you want to mess with that right away. Let's just go to the race itself. Max is the favorite overall, plus 140. You can see fine.
I got a minus 120, depending on where you look. He's a small favorite here for this race.
Yeah. So what do you think here?
I would get involved with him for a little bit because of the form they're in. But again, when we talk about the big picture of 20-plus rounds of racing, Cream's going to rise to the top. Race 1, we saw it last year. They had a great car. It all fell apart at the end for them. Yeah. Anything can happen. One quick wipeout, one bad pit strategy. You have to limit your liability to in my perspective. So what I would do is I'd have a little bit on Max. I'd also be looking at the Ferraris. They ran well here last year. The car's in pretty good shape. I don't think there's anything else. Again, we're a bit redundant, but Alonso, I think you want to take a shot on him in this race to see if they're really that good. Aston Martin as a team, I'd stay away from, but I'd be looking for stuff like that. You can play top 6s. You can play top 10s. You know, certain guys, like I had it right here. Esteban Ocon is right around even money to finish in the top 10, minus 110 or so. I'd be looking at something like that. You can get involved with different drivers in different ways. To win the race, I think it's Max's to lose. I wouldn't be playing Checo. I'd look at Alonso. I'd also look at Charles Leclerc. I think those are your guys. It's obvious. And then as you work your way further down, top 6s, top 10s, I'd be looking to bet against McLaren. I'd be looking to bet against AlphaTauri. It wouldn't surprise me if AlphaTauri had some issues. Tsunoda's a bit of a hothead, as we know. He's competing against the rookie. His rear end's going to be on fire this season with how hot that seat is. You could see them pressing a little bit too hard and wrecking. And I'd be looking against all the rookies this weekend. Yeah. You know, we saw that with Haas. I think it was either, 2 years ago? Schumacher. It's just a disaster with how they drive sometimes. So I'd be looking to fade rookies, fade McLaren, and then at the top, I'd probably be involved with Leclerc, Verstappen, and Alonso.
Just to give you the numbers, now you're right. Max minus 120, Charles plus 275, Lewis plus 850, Carlos plus 1,000, Perez plus 1,200, Russell plus 1,600, and Fernando plus 2,200. Obviously, you mentioned different ways you could do this thing, top 6, top 3s, all these different things to give you prices, different numbers. I thought a double podium finish with Red Bull was interesting. That gets you in plus money. So you're looking at Checo and Max, if you believe that car in that team is poised to dominate, that may be worth something right out of the gate. But in terms of just race winners, I do like pre-quali. Obviously, these numbers will change. That's why if you think you have value now on a Ferrari, take the value now. Because if Charles takes pole, this equation is going to change. That plus 275 is going to change massively. But if you like him now, that would be the way to go. So that would be probably my lean if you're going to go. Max minus 120 pre-qualification. Probably not going to do that right now because, again, it's the first race. We'll see. You mentioned it was one slip.
If he wins qualifying, though, you're going to see that price probably go up. So ask yourself this. If you think that car is that fast and he's going to win the pole, you're not going to see 120 on race day, especially because behind him, you could have a bit of a mess. If Checo's second and can block out Ferrari as they go into that first turn and Max can just get out and away, could be lights out. You know, are you doing anything with Mercedes? Do you have any faith in them at all?
I struggle with that, man. Maybe I'm just putting too much stock into what Lewis said and watching last year, and then they're building off of that car from last year. To your point earlier, it's not like you scrap the design and start again. It improved and it became competitive, but are you going to be competitive enough? And if he didn't feel positive and good, and you still got them kind of tempering expectations, I don't know if that's smokescreen. You know, I would like to see a race or two, and then I might change my tune. Of course, there may be options to bet them. I think George is very consistent. The driver lineup is really good. Obviously, he had so many top fives last year, so you look at his numbers in the top six or to sneak in the top three, depending on how qualifying goes. Maybe some value there. But I kind of want to. I feel like I feel more positive about Ferrari without seeing it yet, and more skeptical about Mercedes without seeing it yet.
This is where Drive to Survive helps us, because when Russell was at Williams and Russell at Mercedes, he's very forthcoming. If the car's not good, he tells you. It's almost like these guys want to let you know, hey, it's not me, man. It's the car.
Yeah, it's not me.
Lewis was the same way last year. I don't think they're bullshitting at all. I think if you get matchups with them versus Ferrari, like if you get a Leclerc versus Hamilton or a Sainz versus Russell, I think you lean to Ferrari in that situation. I think you could end up coming away pretty well as Mercedes tries to find itself. And Ferrari, I don't think they're taking a step back. And they were the number 2 car last year. I don't know if Mercedes has closed the gap, but I'd be looking for those matchups in race 1 as well.
All right, we got to wrap. I know producer David's like, you dudes have gone way too long here, but we got the futures and the racing. As we go forward here in weeks ahead, we will be focusing on the individual races. It'll be a little tighter time for you, but hopefully we get you paid out. And of course, you can watch the race 10 a.m. on Sunday, March 5th. That is the season opener in Bahrain on ESPN. Check that out Sunday. Afterwards, we will have a 12 o'clock post-race show. A lot of guests. We have folks that are there joining. There'll be people in studio. It's going to be a great show. So check that out. Obviously, you can watch on YouTube, Twitter, ESPN, the app, and, of course, the F1 podcast, Unlapped. You can listen to that every single week, headlined by Katie George, Nate Saunders, Lawrence Edmondson. Our great writers are always on that, and different people contributing as well. So here we go. F1 and ESPN. We are on board, season 23.